So we are back with Timothy Brainard for part 2 of our discussion. And in part 1, we discussed his adventure into human design and his adventure into the dietary regimen and his own healing process, all of which led him to discovering and creating the body keys, which has really, as far as I know, become his life's work. And so, hi, Tim.
Hi.
Super excited to hear how you came up with these. So why don't we start there? How did these kind of appear to you? How did you come up with this?
Oh, right. This is going to be a fun conversation. Rowan, thank you so much for hosting this. And it's fun because when you ask how I came up with them, I think to the immediate response is, well, I didn't come up with them.
Absolutely.
I would love to take
full credit. How did they emerge to you?
Yeah, that's really how it's played out for me. I remember some time ago reading about Richard Rudd's journey with the gene keys and how they emerged through his experience, his long-term experience with human design. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh, that makes so much sense. You know, when you live inside of a system, when you really dedicate yourself to living inside of this material for a great deal of time, things change inside of you. And it makes sense that that system would kind of develop a life of its own through each individual that devotes themselves to it on that level. So I always found that fascinating, but never along the way did I think, oh, I wish that would happen to me. You know, or even, ooh, I wonder if that might happen. It was just like, it was Richard's story, you know? And yet, amazingly, here I am with the body keys, which, I'm sorry, it sounds so much like the gene keys. I actually really, wrestled with the brand for some time, but it is the body keys, you know? And in fact, it emerged through my experience in a very similar fashion, in perhaps a less revelatory fashion and more of a contemplative fashion. So here's how it came together. The body keys, well, actually, I should start by saying what the body keys even are, huh?
Yes, maybe we should start with like a little rundown of what they are, of all the different ones. Yes, I think that's a good place to start.
Let's do that. This is, I hope you don't mind that this is just kind of a conversational flow here. It's
that's exactly what it's meant to be.
Okay, cool. I really didn't come with like a presentation. I just came excited to speak with you, Rowan. So the body keys. The body keys serve this process of relaxation. As I studied and applied human design in my own life, I learned over and over again that the true genius inherent to every one of us is something that can only really come to fruition as we lean more and more fully into what's most natural for us, which ultimately is a process of relaxing into our own nature. And so this became a fundament of my experience with human design, one of the primary principles that I always applied in my own experience and also in the mirror sessions that I was offering to others. So the body keys is all about identifying how each of our individual body systems relates to tension. And it's built on this premise that our physical bodies have natural mechanisms for soothing moments of tension or stuckness. And so tension, regardless of its form, will always present itself in the body as constriction, as a tightening of the muscles, as a restriction of the breath. You know, there are these various forms, physical forms, signals that demonstrate tension in the physical body. And what's been really fascinating to me is that regardless of what's happening outside of us, in our mind, in our hearts, in our emotions, whatever, it's always demonstrated physically. And so something that's been really useful for me over time is an awareness that we can oftentimes address an unhelpful pattern of some sort from the inside out. And that somehow by learning how to relax the physical system, we soften everything that it's connected to externally, you know, rather than trying to fix or organize what's outside of us and hope to God it, you know, sticks. We get to kind of focus inward, relax the body, and trust that the body is this special hub at the center of this, you know, complex web of experience.
Yeah.
I hope it's okay for me to just kind of like roll like this.
I love that. I love that that way of thinking because, you know, I think so much of humanity is focused on trying to change the manifest form, which is always the densest and hardest place to change things.
You're
And
right.
so what you're saying is you're bringing people into like, okay, what's the energy that created that form?
That's right.
And that information is held in your stress, in your stuckness, so that's beautiful and resonates very much with, you know, my work and how we work with people. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I mean, each of us is an energetic system. At the base of everything, we are energetic systems. And
Yeah.
so what presents in the muscles and the joints and all of these like physical signaling positions, it's all indication of an electromagnetic position, right? Where it's basically an energetic form of communication, and it's expressing itself to us directly through our physical forms, which is truly fascinating. And what a gift. Like, if anything is going to simultaneously allow us to become more human and more spiritual, it's this. You know, I remember when I was studying systems thinking and systems processes. And there's this idea within complicated systems that there is always a critical point. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard of critical point analysis, but the idea of critical point analysis is that in any given system, there is a critical point, one point at which any alteration affects the entire system. And a great example of this was one I read about a long time ago, and it was an example of an enormous locomotive. And when they initially built these locomotives, I mean, these are just like monstrous machines, and there's so many moving parts. And the idea is that there's like one little rod in this enormous machine that if you remove, the whole thing shuts down. And so there's the critical point, right? And so at the time, it really kind of drove me to this contemplation. I'm like, what is the critical point for the individual? What is my critical point? That place within myself that if I make a minor adjustment, everything else that I would typically kind of scatter about and try to fix on the surface is affected. And the body keys really is a response to that question. In my experience, the body keys comes from that question.
That's beautiful. I love hearing that. That's an awesome question, and a question that we should all be asking ourselves. I love it.
Me too. We are beautifully complex bioorganisms. We are biological systems, and energetic systems. So there is going to be a critical point. And something that's revealed itself to me over and over again is that critical point is held in the body, and it is going to be a matter of relaxation. It's worth noting at this point that when I use the word relaxation, I'm not referring to limpness or lethargy. I'm actually referring to an alert relaxation, a state of complete presence that is like a deep sigh of relief, a deep sigh into the very fullest possible expression of who each one of us is. So there's an attunement here. It actually requires presence and focus, but it's a relaxed presence. It's not tense and concerned and worried about figuring and getting it right and strategizing. It's releasing all of that and relaxing into the fullness of who each one of us is. So it's not tired or lazy. It's on point. You get like the difference there?
Really, it's like,
yeah, it's presence.
It's present.
It's present. I prefer alert relaxation, but yes, it is presence. Okay, so there it is. So it's about relaxing, and I have found this to be true. And in my studies of human design, this is kind of where the body keys really came from. This is the technical underpinning that I really haven't spoken about before. So I do feel excited to share this because as you probably know at this point, and hopefully our listeners have started to recognize this as well, most of the work that I am creating is completely free. There's no part of what I am excited to share that I would wish to withhold or hide or anything. So I feel excited to share this part of it, especially for those students of human design who will understand the technical nature of this. Right? Okay, but simultaneously, I hope not to confuse anyone. So I'm going to speak as clearly as I possibly can.
Okay.
Last time that we spoke, Rowan, you actually described your experience of human design as this blueprint of our circuitry. And we talked about electromagnetism and relationships, and ultimately this awareness of each of us as this circuit board almost. And that's kind of like what you get to see when you look at the imprint of the human design. Yeah. Well, that's not actually very far from like perfectly accurate. Human design is very much like looking at a circuit board, and within that template of the body graph, you have various different circuits. It's actually known as circuitry in human design. So all of these different channels connecting up all these different energy centers, and multiple channels create circuits, right? And so then there are various circuits, each one containing several channels. Now, within that circuitry, you have various forms of circuitry, not too many even. There's, on a primary level, you have individual circuitry, you have collective circuitry, and you have tribal circuitry. There's also a specialized form of circuitry known as integration circuitry. So really you're looking at like 4 primary categories or types of circuitry. Every one of them has a different kind of feel or flavor to it. Every one of them functions in a way that's kind of special to that sort of circuitry, right? Well, I'm arriving at a point, I promise. The individual circuitry has always fascinated me, in part because so much of my own design is activated along that circuit. And also in part due to the fact that so many of the participants of my work tend to be highly individual in their designs. So I'm kind of used to this energy. It's something I live inside. It's something I interact with often. And in my studies years ago, I stumbled upon this kind of sideways fact that the individual circuitry is specially attuned to the acoustic nature of the environment. It's specially attuned to acoustics. And for some reason, back in November, I believe it was November of last year, so coming up on a year now, that kind of got stuck in my brain. You know, sometimes you get a burr under the saddle, you know, a bug in the brain, as I like to say. This was one of those things, and I was thinking about that special attunement, and I thought to myself, well, that would explain why it is that I love music so much. You know, music for me is not just listening to something. It's not background noise. For me, it's actually soothing. You know, I depend upon music, and I actually depend upon music to like relax myself from the inside out and to return this like inner spacious myself to a sense of inner spaciousness, right? And so I was contemplating this, and I thought to myself, well, if the individual circuitry can basically soothe its various forms of tension through music, I just wonder if there's like similar themes that play out in these other circuits, right? And if there were, what would that look like? For instance, what would the particular expression of that like tension look like for each of these different circuits? And then also, what frequency or what activity or something, like what would help to soothe that? It's music in the individual, what is it in these others? And so I just started to kind of play with this. And my version of doing that is usually to like start mapping. So I'll build like a spreadsheet, or I'll build a list, and I did this, and I was just contemplating. And as a result of that, I began to find things, you know, and I found them through a kind of a mix of my studies, my previous studies. So like things that I hadn't previously learned started to come to the surface, and I was like, oh man, connecting dots, you know? Mm-hmm. But also through my own experience, because something that's fairly unique in my personal design is that though individual expression is kind of like the most prominent in my design, almost all of the other energetic frequencies are like about even. Like there's a fairly equal amount in all of these different circuits alive inside of me. And so as I tuned into each one, I found that I had personal experience with all of them. And so it wasn't just like an intellectual process of figuring something out. It was like, I've done this, and I remember this. And this is kind of how the body keys began to reveal themselves to me. And I found over time that there were in fact 7 specific body keys related to the 7 primary circuits in human design. I mentioned that there are 4. There are 4 kind of like umbrella circuits, and then there are some sub-circuits or minor circuits within them, but there come to be a total of 7. And so that's where we arrive at the body keys, a total of 7 body keys correlated to 7 special circuits within the human design. And I utilize this information to draft a profile based on a person's design.
Great. Yeah, I've been blessed to receive my body keys from you in the time between these 2 conversations, and I will say that they are very, very accurate to my tension patterns. And you know, it was really it was one of those kind of like reading a book about yourself. It's like, how did he know all that?
Magic.
Yeah. So let's go into what those are. Maybe we start with those primary four, and maybe also how many people tend to have. How many body keys people, I mean, can you have all 7? Or do you have 3 or 4?
Right. Okay. Great question. I think it's worth noting that every single one of us is going to have experience of, and once you learn about it, awareness of all 7 body keys. Our bodies are remarkably capable and adaptive bio systems that know precisely how to utilize these different keys at the times when they're most needed. But based on our designs, there are going to be, I would say, like a prominent expression of particular tension patterns, which I refer to as stuckness patterns, particular body keys, and also particular gifts. And this is actually worth kind of pressing pause and segueing into briefly, which is that I didn't know exactly what I was looking for in this process. I certainly wasn't looking to develop the body keys. It was a personal question, and I was just exploring. But in that exploration, I learned that not only are there 7 keys, but there are in fact 7 specific patterns of stuckness that these keys serve to soothe. And so I not only arrived at 7 keys, but 7 patterns. And then I realized that on the opposite side of that soothing, on the opposite side of relaxation, is this natural expression of giftedness. And so I found 7 gifts as well. So I think that's worth noting, and I think we should at least introduce every one of the 7 in each category, but we'll start with the keys.
Absolutely.
Okay. And before we look at the keys, I want to respond to your other question about kind of how this plays out for individuals. The reality is that I have seen profiles with 2 keys, and I have seen profiles with, 5 or 6, mine being one of those. And so it's different in every case. And it's a rather intuitive process too, in terms of how I build those profiles, because depending on how deep I dig, I could find 7 in every person. I could find them all. What I'm looking for is kind of excuse me, I have like something in my throat. Okay. What I'm looking for is which of those keys are most prominent, which of those patterns are going to be most prominent. If we can speak to those, kind of provide something really tangible and immediate that we can direct the attention toward, that ultimately allows us to deepen into that space that contains all of it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's different in every single case. It does seem to be more rare on the opposite ends. For instance, it's more rare to have someone with like 2 or 6 than it is to have someone with 3 or 4.
Right.
I find that like median is pretty common, and occasionally you'll end up on the outskirts. And then there are certain ones of these keys and patterns which I also find to be significantly more uncommon than others. So, this is a system that's teaching me every single time I engage in a new profile.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, so we're really in the development of this even as we speak.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I'm not missing any of your questions along the way here, but you had asked about the body keys themselves. Like, let's name them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. For the time being, I'm not going to connect them to the specific areas of circuitry, just because that's a little more technical than we need to get into in this conversation. As long as people know that this is kind of what they arise from.
Yeah, I think
that's a good start.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So the body keys themselves. We have the body key of privacy. I'm going to name them for now, and then we can dig into each of them, okay?
That sounds good.
Okay, wonderful. There's the body key of privacy, the body key of soundscape. There's a body key of privacy and soundscape, which is an interesting one. It's one of the more rare types. There's a body key of activity. There's a body key of organization. There's the body key of nurture. And then there's another rare one, and it's the body key of nature and nurture. Okay, so there's a total of 7 body keys, and some of them may sound redundant, but I promise you they're not. Not an application. Yeah.
I would expect nothing less.
Yeah, right. And this is really pared down, by the way. A great part of this process for me has been taking like a whole lot of awareness and excitement and detail and kind of like funneling it down into ultimately a vehicle that I hope would be something simple enough to explain to a child. Even the terminology, to the best of my ability, is simple enough that a child could make sense of the words. You know, there might take soundscape, for instance, takes maybe a little bit of explanation, but ultimately these are things that you should be able to connect with intuitively, even before I move into, explanation.
Yeah.
The other thing to note is that every single one of these body keys is what I would refer to as an embodied activity of some sort. It's something that you can actually turn your embodied attention toward. It's not just something to think about, it's something to do.
Right.
I feel that that's important. So often our mental process gets wrapped up in the question of, but what can I do? And especially when we feel stuck, that's the thing, is like, what can I do to break free of this cage, right? And so we feel like we're stuck in a corner, like that cage. And so it was important to me that these keys served that question. What can I do? How can I turn my attention towards something, towards doing something that involves all of me in a way that, ultimately I have the space I need and the time I need to soothe the mess on the surface. So that's worth noting. And you may have noticed that one of the body keys was called activity. So that's one worth looking at, because it seems redundant. If they're all activities, why is one of them called activity? Yeah. So we can get into all of that, but let me check in with you. What would you feel excited to hear more about?
I think I would like to go into a little overview of each one. And I mean, I think it's worth doing the key and all the way through to the gift.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise they won't be connected if we try and do them separately.
Yes, I agree.
I know we don't want to go like too long, so it's a little overview, and then at some point maybe we'll do one on each, but like the overview, the top line.
Perfect. Let's do that then. We've identified the 7 body keys. Let's talk about the 7 patterns.
Yes.
We'll name the 7 patterns, and then we'll name the 7 gifts, and we'll pull them all together.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay. So the 7 patterns, and this is in the same order. So if you're that person who's like, taking notes, and you've written them down in the sequence that I've delivered them, you can already start drawing, the lines.
Excellent.
So there's the pattern of compromise. And this is worth talking more about. The pattern of compromise exists within the self dimension, the individual dimension. Okay, every single one of these patterns actually tends to arise within a certain dimension of our experience. So I'll make a point of naming that as well. The pattern of compromise is about self-compromise. It's the compromise of your individual identity. Okay. There's the pattern of melancholy. This is another one of those words that I really struggled. Should I keep this word in there? Because it's not self-explanatory. However, it arises from the individual circuitry. It is an extremely important conversation to have. In fact, you and I could dedicate another conversation to this alone. Melancholy is so important.
Since we share this key.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And anyone with a large amount of individual activations in their body graph, anyone with individual channels defined in their body graph, this will be something that hits real close to home. And again, it's like it's deserving of its own conversation. But for now, melancholy is the pattern. And this is also an individual dimension. This kind of arises within the personal dimension, okay? Yeah. Then the pattern of criticism is really, it's about self-criticism for the most part. Criticism is interesting because it can be externally focused or internally focused. But amazingly what happens here is that even when it's externally focused, it tends to have like a scorpion's tail, like this way of wrapping back and biting you in the ass, Yeah. It's always about self-criticism, whether it's projected outward or not. So criticism is this 3rd pattern. The 4th pattern is paralysis, and this is an emotional dimension. It's emotional paralysis. It's about the intensity of emotion locking you up. And I think just about anyone listening to this has probably experienced emotional paralysis, regardless of whether it's activated as prominent in your profile or not.
Yeah. So
emotional dimension, emotional paralysis. The next is the mental dimension, and this is about mental overwhelm. Overwhelm is the pattern here. And overwhelm and paralysis, you can begin to get a sense for how these patterns, they don't live in vacuums. They wrap one another up into these nasty knots of stuckness. And so mental overwhelm and emotional paralysis, oftentimes you'll find them together. Right? So understanding which keys serve those processes can be very useful. So the next one would be discord. Now we're moving into the dimension. So the last 2 patterns are relational. And it's interesting in how they relate to threat in relationships, because each one goes a different direction. Oftentimes when we're expressing shadow patterns, we'll express a repressive response to that or a reactive response. Discord would be a reactive response to threat. So this is about feeling threatened in relationship and then going to war, right? And the final pattern is the pattern of isolation. And you can see how this is repressive. This is about saying, oh my God, people are unsafe, so I will now retreat to a cave and never talk to anyone again. It's when we become aloof and disconnected from our experience. So dissociation happens here with the repressive response to relational threat. So you start to get a sense for how dimensioned each of these actually is. I mean, you can see that we're just skating along the surface. So let's now connect the patterns to the keys and look at the gifts that arise. Now we can start drawing these connections.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that.
So compromise of oneself, this pattern can be soothed through the body key of privacy, through creating space for yourself. And it seems obvious, which is something very exciting to me about the body keys. I often like to say that the body keys aren't actually meant to be revelatory so much as confirming and permissive. I'm not here to show you something brand new. I mean, if I do, wonderful. But ultimately, I think what's more likely to happen is that you'll arrive at the aha moment through an awareness of something that's so obvious you've missed it. And this happens to us all the time when we're dealing on the level of awareness. So often what we most need is this close. And the reason we can't see it is because we've been looking at it all along.
We're swimming in it.
Yeah,
when it's our pattern and our energy thing, it's like, it's so knee-jerk response. And that's what's so great about, systems, is that they illuminate that for us.
Yes.
And we can kind of see the water that we're swimming in. And if it gets murky, we can clean it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. Beautifully stated, Rowan. I feel like this is fundamental to the whole discussion. As you were speaking, I did think of a fish in water. Does it even know?
Yeah.
The human in air, like these things that we just take for granted. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. We're illuminating those things which are so close to home that we tend to miss them. Okay. Yeah. So the pattern of compromise is soothed by the body key of privacy. And what this does is privacy allows us to recover a sense of our self-identity and ultimately to relax into the ultimate expression of our sovereignty. This is the gift, sovereignty. Another one of those words that when I arrived at it, it was like, boom, there it is. And then I argued with it for like days because I'm like, oh man, but sovereignty is kind of like bandied about. And I feel like people might misunderstand. It's become so exciting for me. The more and more I return to it, I'm like, it's definitely about sovereignty.
It's a beautiful word. I mean, it's so beautiful, so full and so rich.
Yeah. There it is. It feels rich. Yes. And this expression of sovereignty is not artificial by any means. This isn't about becoming the king or the queen. We often hear about these things, especially when we're discussing the masculine and the feminine and spiritual areas. This is individual sovereignty. Yeah. There's nothing posturing or artificial about it. It is the most natural and obvious expression of your being, but allowing that version of you to kind of like step into its own shoes and arise, to become as magnificent as you are, to no longer compromise any part of yourself. This is a profound process. It's one that almost like, like in the movies, you see these holograms that like flicker in and out. It's like, we get that, like we flicker in and out of the fullness of this expression. And amazingly, it's this body key of privacy, creating that spaciousness within and around ourselves that actually allows for us to remember who we are. It's about recovering self-identity. I love that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Soul retrieval would play well here. This is really about like saving ourselves.
Yeah.
And this isn't about becoming a hermit for all time. These body keys are not for all time things. Applying your body keys is about providing for yourself specifically what you need in the moment that you need it for long enough that you relax. And once you relax, you're prepared then to move back into interaction and move back into the stuff of life. But you're moving now from a renewed center.
Yeah.
From connection to your center. And when you do that, the composure and the quality of being that you bring forward into interaction, it's a different animal altogether. Yeah. And I know this stuff is not new to anyone listening, right? If you found your way to this, you've been on the path for a while, you know? It's just about really arriving at new resourcing ourselves appropriately to meet the challenges of our lives in a way that is elegant, rather than messy and miserable and impossible to sustain.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the hard things are gonna happen no matter what. As my dear friend always says, the magician is not the person without any problems. They're the ones with lots of solutions. And it's just, you know, your speed of navigation is increased. Like, the shit's still gonna hit the fan, but you're gonna swim, you know, through it with a little more elegance and a little more support and a little more, you know, grace.
Yes. So I want that soundbite. I want to steal that quote. I want to quote you. I don't want to steal it. I want to quote you. The magician is not the one without any problems. The magician is the one with more solutions.
With lots of solutions.
With many solutions. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so come on, get in there, brain. I love that. Thank you, Rowan.
You're welcome.
That's what the body keys really intends to be, is a toolkit. You know, I refer to it as a map and a toolkit. It's both. Yeah. It's a map of how your body has been specially designed to relate to these moments of feeling stuck. And it's a toolkit so that you know what to do in those moments. You know, the amazing thing is with these body keys that our individual bodies have been expressing them, seeking to utilize them all along. And in some cases we've allowed it, which is why as you learn about your body keys, you're like, oh yeah, duh, I've done that. Yeah. But what I have found, unfortunately, in most cases is that we have also disallowed them and we've also argued with them. For instance, privacy. Imagine you're in a social setting and you recognize that you have in fact made yourself smaller than you are, and you can feel it, and you can feel that constriction in the deepest like core of your being. And you know that you will either continue to move forward into this, you know, social setting, this way of interacting as a small version of yourself, or you will find some way to reconnect to your center and re-engage fully. You have a choice. In too many cases, we're going to argue with the need for privacy as our body says, I got to get out of here. And you say, you can't get out of here. It's the middle of dinner.
Yeah.
You can't get out of here. You're hitting the stage in 10 minutes, right? We have the reasons. And so this is what I mean by arguing with. The body will make it exceptionally clear what it needs. I have to get out of here is something every single one of us listening to this conversation will be like familiar with.
Yeah.
My thing with the body keys is simply to say, when your body tells you that, listen, you know, these are not arbitrary signals. They are in fact communication systems from our inner being. And the body is specially and specifically communicating to the conscious mind. When we can turn that remarkable resource of awareness, that witnessing awareness inward to listen into the language of the body, we arrive at the ultimate resource of all time, like the most useful resource ever.
I've always felt as well with the body, and even with, you know, our relationship with illness and everything, that it's very much the soul that is communicating when it comes to the body. Like, there's different ways the soul communicates the spirit, and it's a very soulful communication when it's coming from your body. I always feel that. I
love that. I wish I could remember it off the top of my head. Oh yes, I just did remember. Good. There's this book called Soulcraft, and I love the book, and I highly recommend it to anyone ever. Like, it's a brilliant book. Okay. And the author does precisely what you've said. He basically roots the narrative of soul in the body and the human form and the earth and the dirt. And there's something about soul that is like in the depths of humanness. And spirit is transcendent, and spirit infuses everything, and spirit is lighter. And somehow we are both always. And so linking those two, mind and body, soul and spirit, this is precisely what the Body Keys intends to do in a way that is practical to the point of obvious, as I've stated. In fact, my greatest fear for the Body Keys is that it will be seen as too obvious and unhelpful. All I can say is, if you apply what you find here, it will transform your experience, because you'll come down into that space of soul.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Rowan, for sharing that too. Okay, so compromise, privacy, and then there's this immersion of the gift of sovereignty. Something that's worth stating before we move on to the next one is simply this: the body keys are inherent. Your body knows what to do, right? This is not something you necessarily need to practice so much as just get on board with, right? It's about allowing.
It's about allowing. That was the word that was coming to me.
I saw it like about to leap out of your mouth. Sorry, I stole your thunder. I came at it quicker. The gifts are similar, and this is, I think I may have even mentioned this in the recording I prepared for you, Rowan. The gifts themselves are not the sort of thing that we need to cultivate or develop or work on, or, there's just no work to be done there. The gifts themselves are inherent too. So the gifts are the most natural expressions of your being. And so when you learn about your gifts, you're not learning about those things that you should do. You're learning about who you are. These gifts radiate as natural expressions of your being when they have space to, right? So I think that's important to note. The gifts sound so beautiful and very much like Richard Rudd's Siddhic level of his gene keys. They feel kind of like almost too big. Like, will I ever? And I can't speak to the cities because to this day, I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever arrive at the Siddhic level, but I can say with the body keys that when we speak to the gifts, absolutely yes. Anytime that you are relaxed and centered within yourself and you arrive at a moment in life that way, you bring with you the quality of these gifts by virtue of who you are. No work to be done. It's the most beautiful thing. Okay.
I love that. Yes.
All right, cool. So let's keep going.
Yes.
The next pattern is the pattern of melancholy. We have a choice to make here. Melancholy deserves an explanation. I don't want to skate past it, but I don't know if we want to dedicate the amount of time that would be required to understand melancholy to this discussion. So Rowan, I'll let you kind of feel into that.
Let's at least just kind of highlight the main meanings of it for you, and then we'll do a session on it. So okay. Let's just try and pull the top line from
Let's describe what melancholy feels like.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Okay.
What do I mean when I say melancholy?
Yeah.
Recall that melancholy is this is connected to the individual circuitry, and it's connected to soundscape. This is the very thing that led me into the body keys. So to this day, having the whole system kind of developing in the way that it has, this remains a hinge point for me. Okay. So it deserves, more time. But for now, when I'm referring to melancholy, I'm referring to imperceptible sadness. I'll often say that this is that phenomenon where you wake up to meet a bright new day and the sun is shining and the birds are chirping, right? And everything is perfect, and yet for some unknown reason, you just feel blue, And this melancholy, this melancholic mood, it is a mood, it's a feeling. And unfortunately, what happens is that we tend to argue with that feeling, and when we do this, we actually disconnect, we dissociate from feeling altogether. And all of a sudden, the world around us becomes gray. It's like this fog descends upon our world, right? And no matter how hard you try, you can objectively recognize that everything is perfect and bright, but you don't feel that or see that because everything inside of you is gray.
Yes. So
in soothing that process, what we're really seeking to do is to restore a sense of feeling. Yeah? Actually chills as I say that because this is so pivotal. Melancholy without awareness becomes depression.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So, and for the modern individual, I mean, this is something that, first of all, many of us are heavily activated in this area, especially many of us in this work, because the individual circuitry is all about impacting. We are the mutative elements in the evolutionary process. We're built to instigate transformation. What's happening here is vital to the individual, the collective, and the overall human process of evolution. This is so important to understand. So melancholy is not arbitrary. Melancholy is actually, and this is all I'll say from a technical perspective, melancholy is a beneficial process built into the chemistry of anyone exhibiting this pattern. It becomes a pattern of stuckness when we argue with it. Okay, so when you wake up and you feel that way, and then you try to wrap reasons around it and understand, well, why do I feel this way? Well, it must be because this is when we run into trouble. And so this is why one of the themes here is blame. Whether we're reaching out to blame something or someone outside of us, I feel this way because he, or I feel this way because my circumstances look like this, or whether we're blaming the inside and saying, I must feel this way because I didn't, right? That blame, that arguing with the feeling or trying to make a reason for something that really has no reason, certainly no external reason. This is what locks it into a pattern that tightens us up. And it's a pattern that is especially challenging to become free of, because when you're disconnected from feeling, returning to feeling feels like the most vulnerable, terrifying, and frankly uninteresting thing in the world. Because if I return to feeling, I'm going to feel sad and it's going to hurt. You know, there's a sensitivity built into this, but amazingly, that sensitivity is attuning to the acoustic quality of the space around it. And this is the technical piece that I think is just so unexpected. Really, what's happening here is there's this yearning for inner silence. That's what it is. And so soundscape as a body key delivers us to a moment of inner silence by means of sound. And there's a paradox, of course, built into that. So we arrive at a feeling of inner silence through the medium of sound. Okay. Mm-hmm. And soundscape is also fascinating because it exists on a gradient, which means that when we're talking about soundscape, we're not just talking about any old sounds. We could be talking about any type of sound. Ultimately, we're aiming for a sound that feels good to you. So soundscape is about good feeling sounds, and it could be nature sounds, city sounds, it could be noise, like white noise. It could be music, right? It could be any sound, and it could even be silence. Silence itself exists on this frequency band of the acoustic, sound waves, basically, right, of the acoustic dimension. So when we're dealing in the acoustic realm, we have all of these options available to us. And the only way to apply soundscape appropriately is to feel your way forward into those sounds that actually feel good to you, that kind of help to soothe. And so this is why and how soundscape actually restores a sense of feeling. The process itself requires you to feel. And when you arrive at that feeling that opens the heart again, you know it. You know, whether it's that song and the crescendo and the symphonic crescendo and the chills down your spine, or the quiet sounds of nature and the birds are chirping and the squirrels are chattering and the brook is, trickling by, and you just kind of arrive at that inner state, that sigh of relief that says, finally.
Absolutely. And
your heart opens and touches the world again. And so this is a really powerful process. The gift that emerges on the other side of that relaxation, which, by the way, if you're able to do this, just recognize for a moment how much courage it takes to apply this, truly apply this, how much courage it takes to face that wall of fog and fear and darkness, right? And to say, fine, Tim, let's see what kind of a soundscape we can design. Let's see if this thing actually works. Even to test this takes a great deal of courage. And it's an empowered position too, because in spite of everything inside of you that feels so icky, you're doing the work, right? Yeah. So I want to take that moment to celebrate all of you who have already done this and all of you who will listen to this conversation and get to work in your own way. It's a big deal. And what you arrive at is the gift of originality. This is what the individual circuitry is built to contribute, is originality. And originality is what I like to refer to as the most ultimate expression of creativity. This isn't just creativity, which has its own value. It's originality. This isn't playing cover songs really well. This is writing your own music, right? Everyone who has this happening in their profile is here to bring something to life that has never before existed. Whether it's a personal breakthrough in the moment, or an insight of some sort that serves you and others, or the body keys. You know, this system itself is a perfect demonstration of that very thing. This is my originality, you know, and every one of us has something like that to bring to the table. Okay.
Beautiful. The melancholy piece kind of reminds me of that, the concept of like the beautiful sadness You know,
Yeah.
that's what you touch, and there's always magic in that. And it's like, it's almost like the kind of composting process, you know. It's like by staying in the melancholy and falling through it, you compost yourself, and you come up with that, you know, that the beauty. You come back to the beauty, which flowers and brings originality. I love it.
That's exactly it. You know, we work so hard to escape bad feelings. But if we kind of wipe the slate clean on those labels and we allow ourselves simply to feel fully, period, regardless of that, what that feeling is, even when it hurts, even when you wake up, again, it could be, you could say it was a bad dream, whatever the case may be, you wake up and you just want to cry.
Yeah.
To not berate yourself for that, to allow that feeling to be what it is, and then to release yourself to that feeling. In every case, it will contribute to the creative process. That's what's happening here. Melancholy is the birth pangs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the labor pains prior to birth, and it's a clear signal that something is happening within you, and it's something good, and it's something beautiful and poetic and original in every case. If we can relax into that and trust that that feeling continues to move until there is birth,
Yeah.
we have something really, really powerful.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And again, the courage to feel fully. There is nothing harder. And Rowan, you get this probably more than anyone I've ever spoken to, because your life's work is rooted in emotion and utilizing emotion in a way that is actually of benefit to us, you know? So and one day I would love to have a conversation with you on all those topics too, because they're all nested up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, allowing yourself to feel fully. That's what's happening here.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right.
So moving on, criticism, in particular, self-criticism. So this is a really sticky pattern. It's fairly uncommon to have this happening prominently in your design. If you do, then you kind of need a tag team of the last two body keys that we just discovered. So on this level, privacy and soundscape will ideally be applied as one single key. So if you arrive at this place where you're locked up in a repeated pattern of self-criticism, or like a critical view of the world around you, when you can't break that perspective, retreat into a personal space and prepare a soundscape that feels good. And what's so fascinating to me about these gifts is they're the least expected thing. When you look at the pattern and then you arrive at the gift, it's like the polar opposite, you know? And so here you move from criticism through the body key of privacy and soundscape to arrive at gentleness, of all things, on the other side of criticism. Gentleness is actually what's natural for you. If you find yourself to be very self-critical or critical of others, be aware that is one side of a coin, and on the other side of that coin is the soft space of gentleness. It's remarkable. And so what you're restoring in this case is not only a sense of feeling, but a sense of acceptance.
Absolutely.
Right. So with the body key of privacy, we're recovering our self-identity. With the body key of soundscape, we're restoring a sense of feeling. And here with the body key of privacy and soundscape, we're doing both of those things. And as a result of that, we're restoring a sense of acceptance that allows for us to take that deep breath and soften into a natural space of gentleness with ourselves and others.
Yeah. Yeah, self-acceptance, so key and so rare, actually. I mean, in our modern culture, you know, everybody's always trying to be something out there that's portrayed as good or
good, better, perfect,
beautiful.
ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Many of us who exhibit any of the patterns we've discussed leading up to now will be very familiar with this one too. The three patterns we've just looked at, they're all happening in the individual dimension. That they all share the same overarching circuitry, and so they are kind of all nested up. And it would be very easy to wrap them all up into a single key. We could do that, you know. It would be the key of privacy and soundscape.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've discussed the individual dimension. we're now prepared to move into the collective dimension. This is where we're going to meet the patterns of emotional paralysis and mental overwhelm. Okay, so let's start with emotional paralysis. Emotional paralysis is served by the body key of activity. And this is the one that I mentioned kind of wanting to tell you a little more about, because they're all activities. You know, you're getting to work, preparing your soundscape, or you're getting to work, moving into a place of privacy. In this case, we're getting to work with some form of embodied activity. And the reason that I chose the word activity is because this is the truest possible expression of activity. This is about complete absorption in some activity. In fact, I wanted to name this absorption, but then I imagined talking to like a little 10-year-old, and they're like, what's absorption? So let's stick with activity, and then we'll describe it. This is about losing yourself to some form of activity, really committing your fullest possible attention to something. It's meditative. It feels quite wonderful, and it's super ordinary. In most cases, the application of this body key will look like nothing. It will look mundane. For me, some examples of activity are vacuuming, washing the dishes, going for a walk, or a drive. You know, these activities are common, and yet something about the simplicity of those activities gives us everything we need to just kind of take that breath and be like, oh, okay, thank goodness. I now no longer need to be so wrapped up in the emotional realm, the emotional questions, the paralysis that was inherent to something usually having nothing to do with what's in front of us, right? The emotions arise in response to something that's probably a concern in the future, or sadness, or something that's connected to the past. So by connecting to an activity of some sort, by absorbing ourselves in some common activity, we return to the present moment. And it doesn't answer the questions that we've been holding in every case. But what it does do is it returns us to that center, which will always be capable of meeting those questions appropriately.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I would imagine that paralysis is quite often something that comes because it's on the main, sorry, 1 second. Hello, Aslan. I'm doing a recording, so actually nobody's allowed in the house, but I know you've just returned. But you can come and say hello quickly.
Hello.
This is Aslan.
Hi. I'm very happy to meet you.
This is I remember his name.
Timothy. He has the same human design as you.
But I remembered him.
Yes. Okay. Timothy Brainard. Darling, when you go out, just shut the door. I don't know if it says you still, or it says do not disturb. That means you can't come back until we can get you.
Oh. I love that. I say we keep this part in.
Shut the door. That's up to you. So yes, what I was saying is I'm imagining that because you said this is more on the social, so that kind of paralysis would apply to, like, I mean, Beirut right now is a pretty good example. You know, we've just had a massive explosion. There's kind of a paralysis because the political system is going nowhere and nobody knows how to fix it. So there's this general paralysis of like, oh my God, what can we do with this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's no coincidence that what's happening in response to the current social situation is something we've called a lockdown.
Right.
I mean, emotional paralysis is, I can't get away from the intensity of this. Right? In fact, what's fascinating about this particular pattern is that it actually doesn't allow the emotion to move. So if you feel so sad, it's like that feeling where you're so miserable, you can't even cry. There's no release, there's no escape. Yeah. And so you feel utterly stuck. I mean, emotional paralysis is probably like, between emotional paralysis and mental overwhelm, I think these are probably the stickiest ones of them all. Yeah. When we think about stuckness, these are there. You know, they're happening. Yeah. So you're right. And because they're happening kind of on a cultural and collective level, there's a mirror that happens there, you know? I love that you use that as an example. It's relevant. So what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to reclaim a sense of flexibility. We need to remember that we're not actually stuck, right? And what happens on the other side of relaxing, when we've allowed ourselves to stop worrying about the thing for long enough to just vacuum the house, right? Or go for a bike ride, whatever that activity is. For one friend, it's painting. In fact, for one friend, painting incorporates multiple keys. And for her, it's just like the perfect thing, you know? Whatever it is for you, and you'll identify it as a part of this process. What you arrive at is the gift of vibrancy. And you think of the zombie-like terror, the deadness that is existent within paralysis, and then the flexible nature of vibrancy. And anyone who has this as a prominent aspect of their body keys profile will be the sort of person who is recognized as a vibrant being. You may or may not see it in the mirror, but I promise you, your friends see it, right? Yeah. This presence of vibrancy is something that is impossible to miss in a room.
Yeah.
So if you have this happening in you, we should be friends. Like people want you around, but only when you're in the mood for it. And it's your job to arrive at that centered space that is, gracious in its expression. That vibrancy is meant to have an impact. So absolutely. I love this one.
Yeah.
I know several people who have this, and they are just blessings to be with when they're centered and rooted in that space of natural expression.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have many people like this too. I can tell just by the way you're responding.
Yeah, and it's one of my keys too. And I mean, definitely that whole thing of just moving it through my body. Like whenever I'm like up against the brick wall, I'm like, I gotta go for a walk. And I will march sometimes. Like I'm like gonna kill someone.
Yeah.
I storm out the house just like, and it just starts filtering through me, and like, and by the time I get back, there's all kinds of answers, and I'm not anymore like jammed, But that's it definitely has to move through the body. It's really crucial.
Yeah, that energy wants to move. It's not here
Don't
for all time.
try vacuuming. It's a good idea.
It's going to be different for everyone. Literally it's inherent. I've always loved vacuuming. It's a strange thing. It works out well, but I never have to like convince myself to do the chores, Okay. Vacuuming is a fun one because it leads us into the next one as well.
Right.
Because the next body key is the body key of organization, which soothes that process of mental overwhelm. So the pattern of mental overwhelm is soothed through organization of some sort. And organizing our space is one version of organization. So when I'm cleaning, I'm organizing. And I'm putting things back in their right place, and somehow organizing the space around me helps to kind of reorganize the space within me, the mental space. And that overwhelm starts to the complexity of that overwhelm, because it's always a function of complexity. It starts to simplify, and all those details kind of like a rock thrown into a pond, and all the ripples, and you're like, ugh. And then you give it that time, and everything settles, and you arrive at clarity, right? And so on the other end of overwhelm, that mess of complexity and overwhelm is the gift of clarity. So what we're doing is we're reclaiming a sense of order within and without. And we're reclaiming the sense of order within by means of establishing order without. Whether that is, cleaning the space around you, organizing your closet, building a spreadsheet, doing a puzzle. These are all different ways of kind of putting things back in order. So organizing is a really fun one. And very, very often you'll find the two keys of activity and organization together. I've seen this in many profiles where you end up at this this potential to pull it all together through relaxing into a relieving organizational activity of some sort. Boom. So you get to work cleaning the house. You're doing multiple things at once, right? It's kind of neat.
Yeah, love it.
It's simple. Again, no one's going to look at you and be like, they're applying the body piece. It's going to be like, well, mom's cleaning the house. You know? But you know what you're doing. And the thing is, as we learn about the body keys and we learn about how they serve us, we're really learning about how to cooperate with the body. We're proactively applying something that is more than natural for us, rather than arguing with it, disallowing it, or stumbling upon it. Yeah. So let's move on. if you feel prepared to. I don't want to move too quickly, but I also see the time. I was like, oh,
yeah, the next one is good.
Cool. Okay, now we move into the relational dimension, okay? And here we're gonna look at the pattern of relational discord, right? And the pattern of relational discord is soothed through self-nurture. Self-nurture. So this is a really fun one. Ultimately, self-nurture is about regaining a sense of balance. Discord is feeling off balance. You know, someone just shoved you and you're trying to understand what happens next. You know, are you going to gain your balance and then throw a punch of your own? That's discord, right? Yeah. And when we're fighting, we're out of equilibrium. So by removing ourselves from that space of threat and nurturing ourselves in a way that supports, you know, that soothing, that process that supports relaxation, we arrive at, amazingly, the gift of harmony. Yet again, total surprise, harmony. Wow. So we move from discord to harmony. And nurture is all about textures and fragrances. It's very sensory and tactile in this way. So someone who has this as a prominent aspect of their profile is going to be the sort of person who probably has a favorite blanket, you know, right? Or a favorite pillow. Or they're going to be super into aromatherapy, like me, you know, and they're going to have incense going all the time, right? They'll also be the person who exudes these qualities. So this is tribal. It's familial. It's about like the closeness of the family. And so this person is probably very warm and affectionate. They probably really like to kind of touch and hug and stay connected. And this person in particular, the one who has this body key as prominent in their profile, is going to be the sort of person who contributes to a space of peace and harmony in interaction. So you may be thrown off kilter and arrive at the pattern, the stuckness of discord, but ultimately what you're meant for, who you're built to be, is a harmonious contributor in any case, whether it's professional or personal, in the family, whatever the case may be. It's a really beautiful key.
Yeah, it really is.
Somehow it's deeper than self-care. You know, it's not cute. It's very primal. You know, this is like an animal need for safety, and that's really what happens when we're thrown off kilter. When this is a moment of relational threat, we feel insecure. So what arises in response to that is, the reactive, you know, response. The reaction is one that fears for your life. This is about security and survival. You feel threatened on a survival basis. So this isn't just self-care. It's actually like, it's like the scared animal that needs to be like sat with for a while before it can kind of calm. Yeah.
And it's quite feminine. It's really that kind of feminine nurturing that brings you back into the harmony. You know?
Absolutely. It's very feminine in that regard. I love this one. Yeah. It's one of my favorites to talk about. And of course, it's one that I lean on. I mean, even the shirt that I'm wearing right now is like a very special form of merino wool. And I just love to touch it. You know, you'll often find me kind of like stroking my hair and stuff like that. Expressions of this body key.
Yeah.
So the next body key is very similar. The next body key is nature and nurture. And this is another one of those two body keys that's fairly rare to see. It's known as a minor circuit, and it's unusual to have like a full channel defined in this area.
Okay.
Statistically unusual.
Yeah.
That's all. And so here we have the pattern of isolation. So rather than the scared animal lashing out and scratching, we have the full retreat, right? We become aloof and removed from our experience. We dissociate from the relationship, and this person can actually stay like in front of you, but they've gone away, right? That isolation is typically internal, but it can also express itself externally. It's a form of escape, and again, it's survival based. This is an awareness that this relationship, this moment of relationship or interaction is no longer safe. I'm out of here.
Right.
But when you leave the heart of connection, you take everything with it, right? There's no way to touch life when you've retreated in this way. So the stuckness pattern of isolation is fascinating because it's different somehow from what we arrive at in the body key. The body key is about nature, and nurture requires a removal from that space of threat. So you actually are leaving the threat for a moment. But in this case, you're doing it from an empowered stance. You're not escaping and hiding.
Right.
You're providing for yourself the thing that you most need in order to regain a sense of connection and return. Right? So here we're regaining our grounding. Right? And the gift itself, I've said it actually a bunch of times, is connection. We're built for connection on this level. Right? But you're built to connect from a personal center, from a ground. Right? So it's an important one for me on this level to really draw that distinction, I think, between escape, which is fear-based, right? And retreating to self-nurture, which is empowered. They might look the same, right? They might both have the same kind of feeling to them from the outside in, but the difference is motivational. And you know the difference. When you're hiding, you know the feeling of hiding and the terror of returning. I mean, if you have escaped to hide, it's really, really hard to ever return with an open heart.
Yes.
But if what you've done is proactively chosen to create a bit of space for yourself so that you can self-nurture, again, to hold that inner child and allow for the time that's needed to return to the grounded sense of self, you've provided the potential for connection. Because when you return to that initial threat in a new way, the threat dissipates. And you have an effect on the other, which ultimately establishes harmony. Somehow that first level is contained here. Just like earlier when we were looking at the individual dimension, all of them are kind of nested up. That's the same thing happening here with these two. It's all nested up. You're built for harmony and connection. You bring that into interaction when you're balanced and grounded within yourself.
Absolutely.
The difference here in the body key is nature. You're adding an element of nature. So this person is not just going to have a favorite blanket. That favorite blanket is probably going to be made of natural fibers, and you'll probably have gone to great lengths to make sure that it is. Another expression of nature and nurture would be something as simple as taking a bath. Think about this. Natural element of water. We're dealing with temperature. We're dealing with texture. We're dealing with fragrances. So it's probably a bath with some bath salts and maybe some essential oils or a candle beside it.
Yeah.
It's all happening all at once. And there's a very sensory primal way of connecting to a space that allows the body to, and I'm kind of chills again as I say this, it's just so true. I've lived this. It allows the body to say, thank God, for 1 second, I can relax into this womb space. It's safe. Yeah. That was not safe. So I'm going to do what I need to do to return to personal safety so that when I turn my attention back to that space of relationship, I have a ground to do it from.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here. And those are the 7 keys, patterns, and gifts that you learn about in the body keys.
Beautiful. It's not at all what I expected when I first read them on your website, or I should say when I first read the highlights. And I think it may have happened to some other people because of the work you did with Simone and Bella. Like I think a lot of us ended up thinking dietary regimen was the body keys, and it kind of makes sense because it's all about the normal thought of natural health. But actually the body keys are really the energetic base for the body health. Yeah, and then right. The other things, the food and nutrition and all of that stuff kind of goes on top of that, if you like, or is complementary. Yeah, perfect. To that. Very, very much. Well, I'm glad you said that, and it's something that I'm still kind of working out how to make that clearer, because it's easy to get. There's all this stuff happening all at once, And the reality is that they all contribute. Each one contributes to the next, which is specifically why I built the trifecta package as an option. I've never done this before. I've never built bundles or packages, but it seems so important to me to have an option that incorporates all these various elements in a way that can be personally and proactively applied in a sustainable manner. Yes. So trifecta is exciting to me because you learn about your digestive process through dietary regimen and specifically what you need in order to support sustainable health within your body system. Yeah.
You also receive the body keys. It's actually included for free within that package. And the body keys, as you say, is actually foundational to the dietary regimen. The body keys, more than anything else I've ever engaged with, is like practical. This is about all day, every day application.
Yeah.
Simple stuff. You carry it with you into every moment. And then the mirror session that's included as a part of that package in particular is useful in that it helps us to take everything we've learned, all the observations and breakthroughs and questions that come up into a conversation that allows it to expand and also to deepen in terms of its practical application. There are always questions that come up. You'll receive your body keys profile and you'll be like, dang, this is good. And then like half a day later, you're going, yeah, but I wonder about,
yeah.
By design, it's a contemplative process. And many of those questions can be well served through interaction. And the mirror session does a good job of providing that kind of a container.
Yeah. That's lovely. I love the way you put it all together. So I had a couple of extra questions about, well, I guess we could go back to how they ended up emerging for you, because we didn't really answer that in the beginning, because we decided we better say what they are first, which I agree with. Do we want to go back to how they emerged for you?
They emerged through the contemplative process I described earlier. Initially, it was a bunch of notes on a notebook, which I would have loved, actually, if I had thought of it, to have with me. I could show you. But once I realized that there was something kind of growing out of this, that there were links to be made between the pattern and the body key in particular, I threw them on a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet is something that's continuing even now to develop. And that spreadsheet, for me, it's like my home base for all this stuff. It contained the different circuits, and it correlated the circuits to the pattern, which correlated the pattern to the key, which correlated the key to the gift. It also incorporated the gene keys by means of what I refer to as an elemental expression, which we haven't even looked at yet. But the elemental expression is kind of like an individual or personal flavor that affects everything else we learn about in the profile. So every one of us will have, say, depending upon which element is activated in your profile, you might have like a watery expression of these things, or very fiery and dynamic expression, right? So each one of us has one element, which
out of the 5 elements in human design, right?
There are actually 6.
6.
Yeah, there are 6 elements.
Ether.
Yep. Okay, so we might as well name them, right?
Yeah.
Go from the ground up, literally. There's earth, water, fire, air, ether, and spirit.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are 6, and spirit as the 6th is fascinating in that it actually somehow incorporates and includes all of the other 5 possibilities. So if you have that elemental expression of spirit in your body keys profile, there's something really special happening there. You're what I like to refer to as the chameleon element. You know, the chameleon
and
type.
do people tend to be have one elemental expression, or different elemental expressions that go with different body keys?
One. Yep. Now the only
kind of like an overall in your chart of like the element that's prominent, or
correct. So if you have earth, for instance, as your element, then your way of applying those body keys is going to have a very earthy quality to it. You're always going to be really kind of focused on like the structure of your body, the bones and the muscle. And there's something really grounding about your connection to the earth as well. So whatever body keys you have, even say, for instance, it's soundscape. You know, if you have soundscape as one of your body keys and an earth element, you may find that oftentimes you're preferring to listen to nature sounds, or to like tribal drum beats, something very like rhythmic, and yeah, you get the feeling for that. By the same token, your gifts will express themselves in a very earthy way, right? And so your original expression, if you have that body key, is going to be something that is always going to carry with it the qualities of earth, whether it means that you'll be specially attuned to the earth itself, or whether it means that you're always going to be contributing in ways that speak to that level of groundedness. You know, there's like a simplicity that happens here.
Yeah. And
now the only exception is 6.
I would imagine really
that
bring
quality
that with you to the people that you interact with as well in your, you know, you bring them that grounding or that fire or that.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I mean by contribution. You know, what is it that you're bringing into relationship that's of benefit to others?
Yeah.
So you will be, if you have that element of earth, you will be the sort of person that others lean on because they can. You are a rock.
Right. Should we go through the others since we did earth or not?
We can. It's fairly straightforward. You know, these elements, there's like an intuitive awareness of how they kind of look and feel. You know, so if earth is grounded, water is fluid. You know, water is very fluid and it's expressive, and its home is in the spine and in the fluid systems of the body. So the spine and the lymph, and really its expression is one that has a great deal of flexibility and passion built into it, right? So let's say that we're dealing with the body key of activity. An earthy expression of activity would be something as simple as a walk. I mean, there's just nothing really kind of complicated or special happening here. You're just going for a walk. And the rhythmic movement of just being on that walk is precisely what your body most needs in order to relax. But if you have the body key of activity and the element of water, you want to engage the spine. So you're probably dancing. And say you have the body key of activity and soundscape, well, you're probably putting on some music and dancing your favorite song. Mm-hmm. See how these come together?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something significantly more fluid in water. I want to say almost more vital, but it's just a different expression of vitality.
Yeah.
Every one of these is vital in its own way. Because after water, we arrive at fire. And here's a dynamic vitality, right? Yeah. Explosion. And someone with the element of fire will have that built into them, the need for like a shifting ground, for things to move and change and develop and grow. And there's an interactive quality to fire that doesn't exist as much on the lower levels of earth and water. Fire is very much about like reaching out and touching, and it has that explosive quality to it that moves in patterns like this, you know? And fire is about the blood. It's about the cardiovascular system. So let's say that you have activity and you're engaging in some form of exercise or movement. For someone with a fire element, this will be not walking, not dancing necessarily. If it's dancing, it's going to be an explosive form of dancing. If I were to guess at an activity, it would be like, wait for galloping. It. Why'd you say galloping?
Or horseback.
You know, what is that? It's the name of it is escaping me, but where you go for a run and you like in pulses, you like run as fast as you can, and then you'll slow down to a jog, and then it starts with an I, the word I'm looking for. It's gone right now, but
I don't know.
It's not intermittent running. It'll come back to me, you know, later when I don't need it. But you get it. There's kind of like a dynamic quality of engagement.
Yes.
And your way of contributing will have this dynamism as well. So think about a fire element expressing the gift of vibrancy. My word, that person like wraps you in their energetic field. They're impossible to miss. And they draw you into that space of interaction. You know, it's talk about like a warm hug or an invitation. Yeah. You can't help but be impacted by this person.
Absolutely.
Right. I literally feel my mind still grinding. Like, what is that word? We'll get there. So after fire, you meet air. And air is about the breath and the respiratory system. And it's significantly more subtle than these three other elements that we've looked at. And so you can guess at some of the qualities that might emerge here. So where before we were walking or going for a run or dancing, air is going to look a lot more like breath exercises or yoga or meditation even. Right? Yeah. Anything that has that airy quality about it.
Yeah.
Right? If you have the soundscape body key and the element of air, you may find that you prefer ambient music over like an upbeat song, right? Maybe you find yourself listening to this kind of just like really light music, and that's what tends to help you. Or maybe you literally love to hear the sounds of air, and so when you find yourself like putting on a nature soundtrack, it's like a thunderstorm or Yeah, you kind of like, it's so fascinating that there's so many different ways these can be applied, and there's no way to know which of them is right until you begin to play with them yourselves.
Right.
So breath is a big one here, and there's something too about like reaching out socially that happens here with air. You know, these other ones are very personal, but air kind of like for the first time extends beyond yourself to include a kind of more social way of expression, form of expression. So I think that's worth recognizing too. You know, you think about inhalation and exhalation, you're constantly, there's like an intimacy built into that, the pulse of that, right? Inhalation and exhalation, you're literally taking the other in and then contributing from yourself. So that's worth noting as well. Ether, this is the fifth. Ether is mine, as you know.
Fine.
Yep, that's right. Ether is really exciting to me because it's mine, but also because of it's not one of those intuitive elements. You know, we get earth, water, fire, and even air, but ether is somehow like moving beyond our typical elemental relationship to things. So ether is connected to the nervous system and the throat, and it's specifically attuned to acoustics. So if you're someone who has the element of ether and the body key of soundscape, pay very close attention to sound. Not only the sound around you, but the sound that's physically emanating through your vocal cords. The etheric element really benefits from vibration, in particular vibrating the vocal cords. And so singing, chanting, humming, these are really useful, as are sobbing, laughing, anything at all that engages the vocal cords. But the root is in the nervous system. So whether you choose to use your vocal cords or not, ultimately you have a body that's going to be powerfully attuned to the vibratory nature of the space around you. And it's something you can feel in the body. You know, you'll get chills in response to things. And the way that you express your body keys and your gifts is going to be interesting and different as well. So if you have, again, let's say activity and soundscape, you're not just putting on music, but you're putting on music that gives you the chills. And then you're either singing along or humming along with it, right? Your contribution is going to have this power in terms of its expression. It will be a vocal expression, right? So your vibrancy is not something that's subtle. Your vibrancy is something that speaks, you know, and you can hear it in the voice. It's fun for you and I to be having this conversation because both of us express this when we're rooted, and you can tell by tone of voice, right? Yeah. You know, this is all about tonal quality. We're sensitive to acoustics, but ultimately we're sensitive to quality. We can feel the difference. It's all about feeling. The nervous system is feeling. It's like our body is made of antennas. We can feel the difference in quality. Something either feels good or not, and the way that it feels to you or I is going to be of prominent importance. It's impossible to miss.
I like the antenna kind of, it is like having extra antennas, like those little bugs you see that are always going like this. Like,
yeah, that's right.
What's going on?
Right. We're like bugs.
Before it even gets to you, you know, it's like, what's going on out there?
That's right. Yeah, we're just big bugs.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. And note too that the stuckness patterns will also be kind of playing into all of this. For instance, if you're an earth element, you'll find that the more tense you are, the more locked up you are in the muscles and the joints and the bones. Wow. If you're a water element, you're going to find that tension tends to lock your spine and you'll have back problems, right? Same for the air. Fire, for instance, is going to be about cardiovascular and blood. Air is going to be about respiratory. You're probably asthmatic if you have the element of air and you're tense a lot. Wow. And for the ether element, it's about the nervous system. Well, that's a lot of fun. The whole body locks down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of get a sense for how these play out in each of those areas. And then for the element of spirit, you're a chameleon. You're a really interesting animal, because for the spirit element, you're really connecting to a space of feeling and energetic mindfulness that requires for you to become attuned to what's needed by the moment. it's for you, it's not as simple as, oh, this is going to be about an earthy expression. I should go for a walk, or I should dance to music because I'm water. It's going to be about feeling into what's called for in the moment. In this moment, do you need something more dynamic? Do you need an upbeat song to kind of get the juices flowing and to get the heart beating? Or do you need something way, way softer and more airy? Or do you need to, go into your chanting? Yeah. Because the thing is, as a spirit element, you're going to make use of all of those different elements at different times. And it's for you to have the mindfulness, the sensitivity to feel into what your body needs in the moment. So this is the most complex of all of the elements, but it is also the most flexible. And, again, I'm a little biased in saying this, I guess, but I feel like it's the most playful and exciting because you have so much space to play inside of. Yeah. But it also requires the greatest deal of self-responsibility, as you have to go looking for what it is every time.
Right. Yeah.
So those are the elements. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's an important addition. I'm glad that we went through those. I have more questions, but I'm also aware of people's time, and that actually feels like a lot that we've just.
It's a ton.
Yeah. So I'm feeling like letting ourselves and letting people sit with that before we try and unpack any more.
Okay, I think you're probably right. I feel hyper inspired by this conversation and so grateful for the opportunity to share so much more than I have had the opportunity to share yet. So I agree with you. Let's press pause and consider coming back to the conversation to explore your remaining questions, any questions that arise from your own experience of your body cues profile, and perhaps also the theme of melancholy. That we could probably wrap all of that into another full
session.
Rich conversation.
Yeah, I think that would be really useful. And I think this is really beautiful because I think the thing that really stands out for me is just that thing of especially actually when you just went through the elements and shared where those things, show up. And, obviously I only have the experience of my body keys right now, but I know that my more life lesson issues, health-wise or body-wise, have definitely been nervous system. And yeah, so that's oh, okay, bang on, and I think that kind of concept of health being the body feeling happy, that being the basis of our health. I feel that's my takeaway from this, for the body keys and what their gift is. So yeah, thank you so much. And I hope everyone really enjoys seeing all this. And I can hear my son coming in.
Oh, wow. I really like what you said about the body being happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, on my website, if you go to the homepage at timothybrainerd.com, one of the circles says something like the best way to make your body smile. It's very much what this is about. It's about falling in love with ourselves and starting from the ground up. So thank you, Rowan. Beautifully stated. Beautiful time you've facilitated for us here.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for unpacking all of this for all of us. And I look forward to all of us unpacking it more with you.